Hello everyone, thank you for coming today. I'm going to set my watch to a tight 25 minutes because I know we're before lunch. Hello everyone, I'm Omar Oakes, editor of The Media Leader. In case you haven't heard of our trade publication, we're an advertising industry title, but we cover the industry from the perspective of media planning buying and what matters most to media owners, media agencies. So I'm pleased to be joined by two media leaders in our industry. But obviously what we're going to talk about today, hybrid working, affects everyone across this industry in different ways. I suppose it's a social and cultural... What are you doing, Josh?
Nothing. Just posing for a photo.
You can't get this working at home. I suppose it's a social and cultural experiment that we're running in real time, and we're still learning as we go. At our Future Media Conference that we hold every October, we tasked the industry with coming up with 3 things that the media leaders should champion this year, and talent was the #1 thing, how we retain talent. So it's obviously very important. We're all here today. Thank you to everyone watching at home. You're both media leaders who champion D&I and better wellbeing at work. Obviously, Josh is also the IPA president. Help me and the all-in audience understand everything we've heard from John just now, everything we've heard about the all-in findings today. Do they chime with what you're seeing in your own organisations? Key stat for me, we found that hybrid working reveals the preferred weekly working pattern is 37% in the office, 54% at home, and 9% in other settings. Now, it's quite interesting because, from what I gather, both your organisations was pretty much about 40% in the office, but you're actually later this year moving to a majority of time working in the office. So maybe explain in terms of the findings, does that chime with what you're seeing, and why have you moved towards that? Veriça.
So, I mean, as everyone in the audience I know will sort of recognise, there are a whole series of tensions within this question, actually, that you have. And these are not easy choices for leaders of organisations or teams to make, necessarily, because you also feel some of this tension on a personal, individual basis. So first of all, of course, what we've had over the last 3 years is ultimate flexibility and control. I control my own life, my schedule, how I want to get things done. Part of the time that was forced upon me. I didn't have any choice. I had to organise myself and get on with it. And now, actually, I quite like having that flexibility, and I don't like it perhaps being, in inverted commas, taken away from me to some degree. But on the other hand, I really miss my colleagues. I really want to work as part of a team. I see that when I go into the office, I have a better, actually, I have a good day more often than not. So you get that kind of level of tension. And then on top of that, you get a tension around, I'd quite like to go into the office more, but I actually can't articulate necessarily how much, how often. And there's a great deal of variation in the views on that, and I'm sure you've all got the same in your own organisations. So some people saying, actually, I'd only really like to go in a couple of days. Some saying, frankly, I'd prefer not to come in at all if I didn't, only for sort of team days. Right through to people who are saying, I'd actually like to be around people and around my teammates every day of the week. So then you have the sort of individual choice matrixed with but I went in and none of my team were there. No one else was there that was useful to me. So I went in and I sat on my own in the office, which was like the worst of all worlds for me because I was still on my own, but I was expecting to have an experience that I've then had a disappointment on. So all of that, and by the way, I feel that individually. So it's not like, as leaders, we sort of feel any different to anyone else. You feel exactly the same about it. You're like, well, I don't really like necessarily now being told how I should operate. But equally, if we don't put some framework around it, that allows for that reconnection, actually, that John was so brilliantly just describing just now, then you have this haphazard piece where no one is satisfied with any of the outcomes. So, again, no particularly new or fresh insight to offer the audience on this because you're all grappling with it in your own organisations. But these tensions are the live experiment, and that's what we have to... It's like the bear hunt, right? We have to go through it. There's like no way around it at all.
That's true. Josh, with your 2 hats, I suppose I should refer to you as Mr. President when I want you to wear your IPA hat.
We should do that, shouldn't we? We should just call you that anyway.
It's a bit embarrassing.
But
please do, yeah. Please
so how long have you been IPA President, and how much, when people email you and pigeonhole you, how much do they talk about hybrid working, needing to develop this better?
So I've been President since the beginning of April, end of March. In answer to your question, how much do people don't email me much about hybrid working. I mean, we talked about anxiety in the presentation before. I feel highly anxious sitting here talking about hybrid working.
Oh, sorry.
To be honest with you. And I think anxiety is something that, well, I mean, the stats speak for themselves, actually. And it's such a tricky subject, this, because we don't really know what perfection looks like, really. And it's not binary. But there is definitely a sense that the more, I think the benefits of being together more outweigh the drawbacks. But we have to Veriça's point earlier about how do you make it worthwhile for people to come into the company and into the office is the key thing. You know, I think most leaders in our industry, I mean, the fact that we're having this conversation anyway, the fact that this day is even occurring, it's a really good thing. You know, I think our industry is really good in the sense that we're constantly trying to improve the sense of it, you know, our sense of belonging and inclusion and how we can improve that. And I think hybrid working is part of that as well. And unless we can create workplaces that are magnetic to our people and really make them want to spend time with each other, we can't really make hybrid working work. Now, I say that as somebody who's been preaching about flexible working for a decade. You know, when I first came in as the CEO of MediaCom in the UK a long time ago, the first thing I put in place was, right, I want flexible working. Everyone should be able to feel that they can work wherever they want, whenever they want, as long as they get the job done. But the one thing I asked for was that people don't email each other after 7 o'clock at night or on the weekends, because for me, that was the thing. I was sort of saying, look, I want you to feel free and have that flexibility, but if you want to leave work early, I don't want you to impose yourself on your colleagues who might not want to leave early sooner. Now, that was like 8 years ago when I first introduced that at MediaCom. And for the first 18 months, people, like middle management just sort of said, what Josh said, just ignore that, by the way. We're not doing that in our team.
Well, and then after a while, is that something that you have to police in order to inject flexibility? Or is it enough just to say, well, you can do what you want? Because people will just do what they always did.
Well, I think policing is a terrible thing. Right? If we're policing things in our organisations, then we're in trouble, frankly. But I think what people do need is guardrails and like kind of frameworks. So, you know, core hours, for example, I think is a really positive thing. I think giving teams, working with teams on what days they best want to go into the office is a positive thing. I think, you know, the more we listen and empathise, the better. But, you know, and I'm rambling here, but I think the more we're together, the better as well. And this is a personal belief, and this is based on personal experience, but, you know, I had funny enough, we talked about this before, and this happened to me again this morning, but I had a bit of bad news right at the beginning of my day today, like early beginning of the day, and then I went into the office, and as soon as I got into the office, I felt better about it, because I just felt like I was supported. I had people around me, and it just felt like it wasn't a problem just for me anymore. And I know this is like one person saying that, but I do think that we're in a collaborative business where it's a people business. Our people are our biggest assets, and we rely upon each other. And I think it's harder to feel that, and it's much easier to feel isolated when you're not together.
So is that almost, you say, in terms of the learnings that we've been able to have over the last 2 or 3 years, has that been the biggest thing in terms of managing people while working from home? To your point, okay, everyone knows what it's like when, you know, it came up in John's talk just now. Feedback seems so much harsher in a Teams message or an email than it does in person. Is that where you're getting at when your companies are saying we need to have people in the office a bit more, rather than keeping an eye on what people are doing? Is that at the heart of it?
I think that's absolutely at the heart of it. I mean, you know, frankly, again, sort of, you know, for the last decade, the message has always, you know, my view has always been, people will do their jobs. You cannot, you know, you can't question that. For me, that's a sort of given. That's absolutely where you start from, because, you know, everyone that I've ever met and worked with has a great pride in what they do and wants to do a good job. So policing any of those pieces is not at all what it's about. But I do think that there's a piece that we're also trying to encourage, which is about, in a way, responsibility, in a sense, that we have to each other and to other members of our team. And that's quite, again, an interesting tension, because a lot of the feedback that comes through when you start, making changes at the moment to perhaps the hybrid working models, and again, I'm sure you're all experiencing this, is the immediate feedback is all very sort of personally driven. How does this affect me? How does it impact me? How does it fit with my life and what I do? And it's really important, actually, as compassionate employers, that we do take a view on that. As in that we think, okay, people have really complicated lives, and we actually need to recognise that and put the right things in place for them, whether it be core hours, whether it be these other things. But there is within this as well, because of the kind of organisations that we are, a responsibility to my teammates. And in the old-fashioned terms of building culture, that feels like a very long time pre-pandemic, the desire to belong to something greater than ourselves, being a driver that actually somehow connects and gives meaning. And I think that latter bit has just become much harder to galvanise over this period. And so some of what we're trying to do really is actually a really intangible thing, which is to make people actually sort of rekindle that sense for themselves. And you can't do that unless you have a framework to make sure that the majority are there on the same days. It's really difficult, counterintuitive bit of thinking that you have to get your head around. But equally, for younger people, for people that are less experienced, or for people that are new to the organisation, it is really difficult to understand what the job actually is in any part of our industry if you are not observing and learning by osmosis. I mean, if I can just share just briefly one personal piece for me. I mean, I arrived at Channel 4 in December 2020, right? And I thought, when I took the job, I thought, we'll all be back in the office in January, so it'll be all right. I did the first 9 months from the other side of my dining room table. Some of you will have heard me tell this story. I had to move sides on the dining room table so that I understood that I had a new job. So I've gone from this to that, okay. And then, of course, you have no idea how anything works. So I think the other piece that has been hugely underestimated, and there is no research on it, and we won't see it until much in the rearview mirror, is the impact on actually how people feel about the organisation that they work in as a result of viewing it through a screen. It's like walking into a card game in the middle of the game, and you have to pick up the hand, you have to work out what the rules are, and you have to play your hand all at the same time. So actually really it's incredibly stressful and wearing. It's the most anxious time of my working life. It was really difficult.
Yeah, it's been difficult for everyone in various degrees. Yeah. I mean, how much, Josh, is this conversation, within the light of, it's been a really tough industry to work in, where we had the shock of the pandemic, lots of people unfortunately lost their jobs, and then it seemed the year after everyone's hiring like crazy because the recovery was stronger than we expected. And we've had, obviously, social distancing to cope with, and everyone's been grappling with that. So now we're at a place where we feel more comfortable talking about ideals. Despite everything that's come before, how much do you think we've muddled through this? How much has that been affected by these short-term pressures? And do you think that this year we're finally in a position for businesses such as yours to finally spell out, this is what hybrid working should look like? This is the amount of flexibility we're willing to tolerate.
I think that we are always on a learning journey. So to say, I think that the companies that have been responsible through the pandemic are ones who've tried to think long term and tried not to make snap decisions about anything, whether it's hiring people, letting people go. I think any leader that I speak to has always thought about, right, how do we keep our people, frankly, and how do we make the decision? All decisions are always about the best things that are the best for the people that work for the company. I know Veriça does that. I know that I take that very seriously, and I think that will continue to be the case. So I don't think we're too short-termist as a business, honestly. In terms of hybrid working, we're on a journey. We're right at the beginning of it, really, and I think we're trying to put in place ways of working, as I described before, that are attractive to people. Something I say, and this may or may not be popular, but I'm just going to say it anyway, is leaders have a responsibility to try and create cultures that will be brilliant for their people. Yeah, and leaders are put into those positions for a reason, because you know, they take that sort of thing seriously, generally in most companies, certainly in our industry, I would say. And so I think that sometimes we have to make decisions that might not be deemed popular, and we might get pushback on them, but we're doing it because we're trying to create cultures that are great for people. And then I think people have to look at what we put in place, and look at us as leaders and say, do we trust this person and do we believe in what they're trying to do? And then they need to make a decision as to whether they want to be part of it or not. And I think what we're, and I can't speak for Channel 4, but I'm sure Veriça feels the same way, is that we're trying at GroupM and in the agencies of GroupM, we're trying to do that. Literally trying to do that, trying to make it an environment and a culture where we can do amazing work, where we can spend great time together, where we can enjoy it. And that might change. You know, what that looks like may be different in 12 months' time from where it is right now. But I think what we'll do is we'll put things in place, we'll analyse how they're working, we'll listen to our people, and we'll assess it, and then we'll move forward.
I'm still a little bit confused because private conversations you'll have with peers in this industry, you know, privately people say that, you know, we can't get people back in the office as much as we want to. And there seems to be pushback whenever it's mentioned that, okay, we should be coming into the office a little bit more. So what's going on here? Josh, you talked about leadership just now. Is it, frankly, a failure of leadership across the board? Or is it more about, you know, we had panels earlier today talking about the need to advertising. The fact that advertising might not be seen as that sexy career that it once was, God forbid. But which of those, I mean, how much of those are issues? Is it failed leadership, or is it just the fact that it's not as attractive as an industry to work in, so it's become more transactional for employees?
I think there's actually a thing in the middle that I don't know that perhaps the industry or indeed any workplaces have spent enough time focusing on. And I don't quite know myself what the answers are in this area, but there is a thing about the experience. Because in the world before, you had work from home, when you had very specific places and modes of work. And now I think we need to completely create a different rule book and set of engagement around how leaders and managers lead and manage teams, how you bring people together in agile, small a, and nimble ways, and actually how you provide a valuable experience, if you like, for the value exchange of come and spend time with your team, and actually we're going to do something that creates value for all of us and for the organisation. And that doesn't necessarily mean just all the softer side and the socialising. It's actually a completely different way of thinking about the tasks that you and your team might need to accomplish. And we don't have that muscle memory, right? We just don't have it, because if what we're saying to people is, come into the office because the osmosis of just doing what you're doing at home is great enough, that will get you so far. And you could do that, right? And it would still perhaps have a greater collective benefit than not doing it. But if you could think, actually, if we're going to ask people to do this, for half of that time, we're going to actually think differently about how we can get to better, faster, more creative outputs, which won't necessarily be the ways that we used to do those things. This is why I say I don't have the answers, but it seems to me that we have to shift our view of kind of what the experience and the output needs to be. And that might lead us to some more interesting answers or things to try in this experiment.
And then in addition to that, and it's sort of a separate thing, but I think is relevant to this conversation, culture is critical to workplace success and people wanting to be part of it. And I think, you know, Veriça made that point earlier about the collective and responsibility, you know. And I think that too much of the time people say, you know, what's in it for me? What's in it for, you know, why should I? You know, and actually I think that culture doesn't just come from the top. Yes, the top have responsibility in culture, but we all create culture in our businesses. We all have a responsibility to stimulate a really creative and inspiring culture. Everyone in this room has that. Everyone in all of our workforces have that. And I think it's very difficult. It's difficult to do that if we don't spend time together. And listen, I'm not saying it should be like it used to be, because the world's changed. I recognise that. And all of the things that Veriça just said are absolutely right. There isn't the muscle memory. We need to learn how we do that, how we create not just output, but also culture when we're having to do things in a hybrid world as well. But the importance of connection and, you know, human connection is critical to that. and we all have a responsibility. And I really hope people can see that, and that it shouldn't, culture isn't something that happens to you. Everyone's empowered to create the culture that they want to, they want to be part of. And I want people to embrace that.
So what positive things, in order to take a step forward, have you found within your own organisations or across the industry in terms of mitigating against that what's in it for me culture that you reference, empowering people to look outside and work with their teams? Is it kind of, how do you do that?
So I think there's some, we've got some, I guess, small tactical examples of some of the things I was just describing, where a kind of level of thoughtfulness about the kind of work, the kind of tasks, the kind of things that people are doing day to day, and the cadence of what the working week looks like, and therefore, how and when you might want teams to come together. So we've sort of taken some very small steps into that. Again, I'm sure many of the people here have and beyond. I think the other thing that comes with it is, I think there's an element as leaders of having to, actually, the effective frequency of some of these key messages has gone up dramatically. I think you have to remain very open to talking about things much more, both about the challenges of, if you like, hybrid working, the impact that the last few years have had on people's mental health, mental fitness, and how they feel and their well-being, and also about actually, the fact that we are on this journey. Because the other thing that is definitely true in this sort of more dispersed way of working in this hybrid world is that the space between what is said and what is received is much greater than it was previously. So that is a real learning as leaders, that you have to close the gaps much more between your intent and the reception, perhaps, or sort of think about that a bit more.
Yeah, I mean, I think look, we encourage our teams to work out how they want to work together more. That's much more of a thing now. And we don't mandate that. We let them allow them to, and that's quite an interesting thing for people to work on together. We do all sorts of things in person that encourage, like inspiration sessions, assemble sessions, that we encourage people to come in, and that's work related, but also other world related as well. To like I say, make the workplace a more interesting place. Actually, the design of the office has changed, so I think we've created much more interesting collaboration spaces in the offices to make it more, kind of, I don't know, a nicer place to spend time, really. And I think, we're, like my company, we're moving office in a year's time to a building on the South Bank, and that's a kind of architecturally fascinating brief, because it's like, right, what does the future office look like? And
so what does it look like? You must put the plans in. What does it look like?
Well, I'm not an architect or a designer, but I'm just the one saying, here's the brief. But
So what's in the brief? How do you make it?
Well, I think it's a lot more spaces and interesting spaces that encourage, that don't feel like work, that encourage people to, work together and talk together and come up with ideas together and use different media together in person. And I think just, make a physical space that doesn't feel so much like an office, honestly. And I think that's a big part of what the future of work needs to look like.
I think actually it's a really underestimated factor as well, that kind of, as part of the experience, the literal office space and how it works. If you've got, this didn't happen at Channel 4, it has happened, I know, in other places, but if you've reduced your footprint, then if you're asking everyone to come into work more of the time, they're going to have a really dreadful experience when they do, and therefore they won't want to come back. And again, some of you might be experiencing effects like this. And there's a thing about actually the UX of everything is you've got to think about it through a different lens. I mean, it'd be fascinating to see how your office design differs from one that might have been designed just pre-pandemic, where we had one view of what we thought flexible working might be. I suspect it will look very different to that. So we're all going to come and do a site tour.
Okay, fine, sounds good, yeah. No pressure, okay.
If anyone wants to see the site plans for Josh's new office, please get in at lunchtime. But I'm going to call it there. Thank you very much, everyone, and thank you.
Thank you very much.